Hollywood has tried for years to bring video games to the big screen, but despite its progress, it still doesn't understand what makes them special. Video games are more than just entertainment. Whether it's alone or with friends, they offer unique stories, immersive worlds, fun characters, and experiences that players cherish. The amount of variety has enticed people for the past 30 years, where each generation has been introduced or reintroduced to these beloved adventures, creating a rich gaming culture that has grown exponentially, with 3.3 billion people having played some form of video game. And that number is only rising. At this point, gaming has become deeply integrated into modern media and consumerism, from gaming consoles and merchandise to esports and online content creators who pretty much get free advertisements. The industry is massive, and with such a massive market, it was only a matter of time before Hollywood capitalized on its success. And yeah, sometimes it works, but more often than not, it comes at the expense of what makes these games so special. Now, in all fairness, adapting a video game into a feature film is not easy. It can be complicated to take an interactive player-controlled medium and crafting it into a linear story while being entertaining. Trust me, I know. There's a reason why the first attempts at video games are, very odd, where they almost seem terrified of embracing its source material to where it created abominations. However, with the rise of story-driven games like Uncharted, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, The Last of Us, God of War, The Witcher, and like a ton more, above the drama, action, suspense, which is perfect for the big screen. Yet despite literally having the groundwork laid out for them, Hollywood consistently misses the mark. Some adaptations make money, sometimes a lot of money, but they often alienate their core audiences that literally made the franchise what it is. Some might call it a video game curse, others corporate greed, and some are bozos that use their families as scapegoats for their own incompetence. But the truth is simple. Hollywood just keeps making the same fundamental mistakes, and I think I know what they are. Compelling characters are the heart of any great story. They draw us in and make us care. They give meaning to the journey by shaping the emotional stakes and the important connections that the narrative thrives from. We like seeing a character fail, succeed, have desires, flaws, and growth. It's not what only makes these characters relatable, but memorable. Typically, when it comes to video games, you, the player, are the main character, where your own personality, desires, and growth are seen through the gameplay. However, when it comes to story-based games, its characters are far more developed to entice us into who we're playing as and how we see the world, and no game does that better than Uncharted. The Uncharted series is special, not just for its action and adventure, but for its well-developed and endearing characters that have layers, like an onion or ogre, where each character is memorable and serves an important role alongside us, the protagonist, Nathan Drake, where the story knows how to balance its fun, witty banter alongside the emotional and darker moments with its core cast of characters, displaying the complex relationship between characters like Nate, Sully, Elena, and Chloe that elevates Uncharted beyond a standard action game. Even at its weakest, the series remains compelling because of its characters and the heartfelt performances behind them. They're the glue that holds this series together, and it's the reason why Uncharted is so highly praised for its character and narrative work. The movie, however, strips everything that made these characters compelling. Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg try to embody Nathan Drake and Sully, keyword try, but their chemistry and writing pale in comparison to their in-game counterparts, where rather than telling an emotional character-driven story with action and adventure beats, it decided to go for the standard origin story approach while throwing in recycled action set pieces from the game.
They're the same picture.
Where our main character, who's typically defined by his flaws, charm, and dilemmas, is reduced to a generic adventurer with no flaws or depth. And sure, if you know nothing about Uncharted, Nathan Drake is a swashbuckling, snarky action hero, no different from any action movie protagonist. But in reality, he's a very complex and heavily flawed character who has to come to terms with his ego, lack of commitment, pettiness, addiction, obsession, and morality. Despite all his flaws, he has a good heart. I mean, he's probably killed an entire nation's worth of people, but he's still a pretty decent guy. Unfortunately, none of that is portrayed in the film, as it fundamentally changes his characterization from the ground up, turning him into a heart-of-gold newcomer thrown into a wacky adventure who ever so slightly becomes a thief. Where it throws in important characters like Chloe or Sam, but does the bare minimum with them, or blatantly doesn't understand their role, character, or meaning to Nate's story and development. To be honest, you could throw these characters into any adventure plot, and it will work if the characters are intact. The problem is that it fails to respect the essence of its characters. These are beloved figures, carefully crafted over years of storytelling by Amy Hennig, and Neil Druckmann, kind of. And they deserve the same level of respect and care. But there seems to be a clear misunderstanding of these characters, and if you don't understand the characters, then you miss out on not just the heart of Uncharted, but other series that rely on character-based storytelling. The movie might call him Nathan Drake, but he's not the Nathan Drake. And that doesn't have anything to do with the casting, but with how these characters just aren't written with the same amount of creative nuances and spirit that make characters like him so iconic. Instead, going for a shallower approach, where it does reference stuff for the audience to gawk at, but it doesn't really get it. Which kind of leads to another reoccurring problem amongst video game adaptations, when Hollywood says screw it to the story and characters and tries to overcompensate with excessive fan service. The Resident Evil franchise has had a long and troubled history with film adaptations. From 2002 to 2016, Paul W.S. Anderson helmed a series of movies that were essentially a love letter to his wife, which sidelined the franchise's iconic characters in favor of, his wife. Naturally, this didn't sit well with fans considering how these characters were underplayed or overshadowed. And as someone whose favorite character is Leon Kennedy, like the contrarian I am, and also Jill Valentine, just due to the fact I find them the most interesting characters and also they're cool and hot. So to any fan, it was a major disappointment to see these characters constantly sidelined. And after this film series was taken out back like a dying dog and taken out of its misery, Capcom graced audiences with a series of remakes covering some of the older RE titles, with RE2 Remake being my introduction to the series. And with such a massive revitalization, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to start fresh and give fans a new adaptation that stuck with its source material. Unfortunately, what we got was Resident Evil: Welcome to Raccoon City, which is an absolute mouthful of a name that crammed Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 and elements of Code Veronica into a single chaotic mess. I mean, who would have thunk that taking two 8 to 11 hour games with two very different stories and characters might not mesh together in a 2-hour movie? Now, to give it some credit, while it's overcrowded, it at least tries to do something interesting with Birkin, Claire, and Chris and their dynamic. It completely loses it by the end, but it tried, I guess. And heck, I'll give it to them and say it had some pretty cool cinematography and moments, but as the film progresses, it discards anything remotely good out the window, in favor of frantic, disjointed fan service where by the end of it, I wanted to strangle Leon for his incompetence and blow up Raccoon City myself. Whoever thought it was a good idea to shove a bunch of iconic games together into this mess of a movie, fire them. Just fire them. Because Welcome to Raccoon City throws scenes, characters, and references from the game without any real weight or meaning, as it juggles two separate plots, one following the STARS Alpha team investigating the Arklay Mountains, and the other focusing on Leon and Claire dealing with the outbreak in Raccoon City. But instead of weaving these narratives together in a meaningful way, they feel completely disconnected, which was obviously going to happen while adapting two very different games. And by the time the movie reaches its climax, both plots feel rushed, unsatisfying, and lazily executed. It feels like watching a TLDR of iconic scenes from the first two games while missing the entire point of the series, as the original games tackle unchecked science and corporate greed with organizations like Umbrella, where people are forced to adapt and overcome an unparalleled situation. And sure, they fight zombies, survive unbeatable odds, and it does have unchecked science with Birkin wanting to be God or something stupid. But most of the time, it feels like the movie just takes a look at the audience dead in the face and go, hey look, we just referenced Yawn and Jaws. Yes, I know it's Neptune, shut up. Isn't that cool? Or, check it out, it's the Ashford twins, expecting fans to be excited without ever explaining their significance within the movie's own universe. And if you're not as well read on your Resident Evil lore, then, good luck. Now, having fan service isn't inherently bad. When it's woven naturally into the world, it can make the story feel richer and more alive. Not only does it reward fans, but it allows a thriving world to exist that doesn't alienate newcomers. But when it's shoved in your face, it completely takes you out of the movie and just makes you think about how much better the source material is. Especially when its references are surface level and don't add anything to the story or characters. The movie never really considers the deeper elements within the series and actively harms the experience as it tries to be its own thing while also trying to reference the games as much as possible, resulting in a movie that is simultaneously overloaded with references yet lacking any real substance. And it's a shame since Resident Evil 1 and 2 have rich, atmospheric stories that could have easily carried their own individual films. If the movie had just simply committed to one of these and took its time to deliver a far more compelling horror-focused movie, then maybe it would have done better. Like, seriously, how hard is it to throw a bunch of people into a monster mansion? Because apparently it's impossible. But by overstuffing it in an attempt to earn fan points, it ended up dead on arrival. Seriously, this made no money. And rightfully so, because I can't tell you the amount of genuine anger this makes me feel. Typically, I fake this stuff for entertainment, but every time I talk about this movie, I feel my blood boiling. I swear, Zach Krieger, if you mess it up again, I am starting World War III. But the thing is, if an adaptation isn't stuffed to the brim, it falls onto the other side of the spectrum, where it ends up being predictable, generic, and ultimately safe and forgettable, where it follows one of the most common narrative structures, the origin story. Of all the films I've mentioned, and will mention, this is probably the best one. That said, my knowledge of Tomb Raider is limited to adventure chick with guns getting into shenanigans with a bunch of simps. So unlike the other adaptations I've criticized, I'm not personally invested in this franchise. I'll play them at some point, but this is the film that made me realize Hollywood really loves origin stories. Now, we all know what origin stories are. Uncle Ben's always gotta die, and the Waynes always get shot up in an alley. It's the kickoff point that makes the characters into who they're destined to be. And sure, it serves as an introductory point, but when you stop to think about it, so many adaptations serve as origin stories. Tomb Raider, Uncharted, Sonic, the Mario movie, Devil May Cry, etc. are all origin stories, which is odd considering how most of the time video games introduce these characters within the midst of the story or action. They're already established characters in their prime, and we get to learn about them over the course of the game or series. And in the case of Tomb Raider, Lara Croft doesn't become Lara Croft until the very end of the movie, which is like, why would I waste my time watching a movie about a character who doesn't even become the character I showed up to watch till the very end? And I think this is something plaguing multiple adaptations and ultimately hinders its writing and characters. Now, to be fair, Tomb Raider is one of the few video game adaptations that genuinely tries to tell a compelling narrative with character development, emotional stakes, and a coherent plot. But while the effort is there, the execution is weighed down by cliches, inconsistent pacing, and writing that doesn't always land as intended. Where it takes the safe choice of being an origin story on how she became the Lara Croft, leading to most of the movie being very predictable. Like, yeah, she fits within the standard adventure archetype, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just she isn't a compelling character. Yeah, she's got a motivation and flaws, but she has, like, no personality besides being British. The most we get personality-wise is just that she's smart and witty with daddy issues. Anything we learn is pretty surface level. She kinda just goes through the motions, being both a passive and active character whenever the story needs it. For example, rather than actively looking for her dad with her massive inheritance and vast resources, she refuses to accept her wealth cause plots. Why she actively hurts her main objective? Who knows? But after getting a quick dose of motivation, she finds him and, oh, we're only halfway through the movie. That was quick. After that, she returns to being a passive character as she gets captured, is forced to raid a cave, dead people turn out to be bioweapons, and everyone dies! Well, except for her, of course. Now, I get it. It's her origin story. She's a noob. That's the whole point of the movie, for her to become the gun-toting adventurer to get people in their seats for the sequel. But, hot take, I feel like whenever this is done, it's just a cheap way to get character development. For some reason, the only way these films can portray development is just taking the main character and making them naive and weak, which is, stupid. In some cases, it's okay, but the over-reliance on covering a character's backstory is unnecessary. You can have a character develop within their prime with a more nuanced approach that delves into more emotional topics rather than taking the safe way out. And in the case of Tomb Raider, the first 30 minutes of the film play it so safe. It should have just opened with Laura's ship crashing on the island and retroactively informing us what's going on throughout the plot. Not only does it save time, but it serves as a great hook that throws the audience straight into the story. Which, funny enough, is exactly how Tomb Raider 2013 opens, which to my understanding is what the film is loosely based on. From the powers that be, aka Wikipedia, in the first 30 minutes of gameplay I've seen online, it has a creative and unique story with Laura and her crew stranded on an island fighting against cults, the supernatural, in the wilderness for survival. If that sounds vague, it's cause it is. I tried to not spoil myself. Don't judge. But my point still stands. Why not adapt the more engaging story into your blockbuster adaptation? What made Hollywood ultimately decide to go back to the basics instead? Money. It's for money.
Yeah, boy.
By having a younger star for an origin story, they get more longevity to create a film franchise, on top of the fact it's easier to write. But last time I checked, this wasn't getting a sequel. It's pretty much just an easy and cheap way to hook in both fans and casuals into checking this out and lining some pockets, which is why so many video game adaptations do this. It's why more often than not, adaptations play it way too safe. and it only covers the basics out of fear of being too bold, where it either leads to a misunderstanding of its source material or trying to cover its faults with nonsensical fan service. There's a clear dissonance between the people in charge and actual fans who are familiar with these characters, their journey, and their world, and nowhere is that more obvious than in Until Dawn. There's something special about the games we connect with. Maybe it's the world, the story, the characters, whatever it is, it stays with us. That's the magic of a great IP. And trust me, everything is an IP. It's what drives the entertainment industry forward as these subgroups give their time, dough, or souls for the next cool thing in the series. But with that kind of loyalty comes both expectations and responsibility. Sometimes people live up to it, but other times, yeah, it doesn't go great. And when it comes to the silver screen, there's a certain expectation set when you plaster the name of a beloved franchise onto something. Take Until Dawn, for example. Sure, the original Until Dawn isn't the pinnacle of writing. Heck, its dialogue is pretty bad at times.
It was just a prank, Han.
But it has a unique charm that made it memorable, where it blends psychological, slasher, and creature horror into something that feels fresh and self-aware, painting a cold, dark, and foreboding atmosphere that slowly closes in on its main cast of characters, making every decision the player makes feel like a life or death situation. It's fun, it's creepy, it subverts your expectations in all the right ways, and it makes you care about this group of semi-idiots. Not Emily, though. Which is why it's so frustrating that the Until Dawn movie almost has nothing to do with the game, besides being a potential prequel, which I'm not even gonna go into the weird timeline shenanigans with that one. On its own, it's alright, but as something that is taken from the Until Dawn name and universe, it totally fails. There's a clear visual style and lore established within the original game that this movie totally ignores, which retroactively cheapens the original if this is canon. For example, the main enemy within Until Dawn are Wendigos, which are taken straight out of Algonquin folklore, from their cannibalistic tendencies to appearance and habitat. The movie, on the other hand, not only has a plethora of other enemies, it changes the Wendigos' origins to where people turn into Wendigos based on how many times they die within a time loop. I'm not making that up. Honestly, I'd rather this be a Dead by Daylight adaptation than Until Dawn, considering its plot, variety of enemies, and over-the-top gore. That or be original and just do tulpas, aka thought forms, which are created from whatever dark, twisted subconscious you have. And the weird thing is, the movie actually sets up the concept that the creatures are created from the MC's psyche, Silent Hill style, but then they just don't commit. And let's be real, having a time loop as your central gimmick isn't a bad idea, it's just weird when you're adapting a game that's all about punishing you for your actions with no do-overs. But by carrying the same name and not adhering to its aspects is just disrespectful towards the original IP. If you want to have your own story in-universe, then good for you, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't mess with the set expectations and lore established. For example, the Fallout TV show, similar to Until Dawn, takes place within the same universe as the game and tells its own story. Is it perfect? No, but it feels authentic to the brand and what Fallout is. While Until Dawn feels like a blatant cash grab on a popular IP that lacks the same creativity and charm as the original. When you strip an IP of what makes it meaningful, you're not just failing the fans, you're failing the ideas and the connection that made it so special to begin with. Because without creativity, there's no soul, just a corporate husk relying on the memory of something better. Behind every game is an idea, a little sprout of creativity born from someone's lobe. It's that spark that creates new worlds, mechanics, and stories because somebody cared enough to imagine them in the first place. Creativity is peak human ingenuity. It's how we went from fire to the stars. We like seeing the creativity of others, but we also like doing it for ourselves, which is why something like sandbox games have stood the test of time. It's why Garry's Mod, Terraria, The Sims, GTA Online, Animal Crossing, Minecraft, and unfortunately Roblox are some of the most popular games out there, where they give you the tools and options to do whatever you want, no matter how unethical or crazy they might be. But when you take a game like that and condense it into a movie, you better bring your A game, because you're taking the personal experience of millions into a singular narrative. That means capturing not just the world, but the spirits and the endless possibilities that define it. Which brings us to the Minecraft movie. Now, to be fair, what hasn't been said about the Minecraft movie? Some people consider it one of the worst movies ever. Others unironically like it, brain rot and all. Or, some people bring live chickens, set off fireworks, and shank people. Those poor minimum wage workers. But under all the memes and marketing, the movie itself is devoid of creativity. The movie is pretty much Minecraft Jumanji. Or Tron. Heck, they even got the laser in the sky from every 2010 movie, where under all the bad writing and cardboard characters, it tries to say something about creativity, but it just doesn't know how. It brings up concepts like escapism, the inability to let go of the past, and being mocked for your creativity, but it never explores it in a meaningful way. And it's not fair to throw around the excuse of, oh, it's a kid's movie, or it's a comedy, to abstain it from criticism. Because guess what? The Lego Movie is a kid's movie, where even though it came out a decade ago, it was able to tell a well-written story that respected its audience, both adults and kids alike, to handle its nuances and showcased how important creativity is. The Minecraft movie had the same opportunity and ability to do more, but it actively chose not to. And that sucks, since the movie was always gonna make money. It's Minecraft, it's the best-selling game of all time. It literally shaped a whole generation. It's one of the most personal, creative, and community-driven games out there, and the movie had the chance to celebrate that, but instead it plays it safe. The biggest risk it takes is being live action, which is questionable in itself, where under all the humor and aesthetics, it just doesn't say or do anything of importance. Don't get me wrong, if you like it, you like it. I'm only judging you a little itty bit. It's just a Minecraft movie could have genuinely meant something and expressed the value of creativity. But ironically, for a movie about creativity, it has none. But hey, at least you get to see Jason Momoa and Jack Black 69ing. And let's be honest, all these issues carry over from project to project. This isn't just a Minecraft problem or an Uncharted problem, it's a result of how games have been treated for decades. For a long time, games weren't respected. They were dismissed as something for kids or losers and was a complete waste of time, which is why early adaptations turned out the way they did. It was taken as a complete joke, but now games are everywhere. They're billion-dollar franchises with massive fan bases and global recognition. And with that newfound spotlight comes the problem of profit and passion, where studios see the popularity of the IP, but not the souls and creativity that make them special. That's why we keep getting shallow adaptations that rely on basic tropes and surface-level fan service, because the people working on them don't understand what makes them so personal. Whether that be the director, writers, or executives, they go by what they think the fans want, which ends up turning any passion into a marketable checklist. And it's a shame, because these worlds matter, and they need to be handled with respect. They're what build connection, sparks community, and inspires creativity. But while their track record has been messy, there are signs that things are changing. We've seen what happens when adaptations actually respect their source material, and it proves that these games can be adapted in a meaningful way. More and more people who grew up with these games are finally getting the chance to tell these stories and bring something fresh to them. Because fans don't just want to see their favorite games on the big screen, they want to feel the same magic and wonder that made them fall in love with these games in the first place. And if we try to avoid these tropes or issues with adaptations, I think they'll be given way more room to flourish and stand on their own. And if studios can finally get that right, not only will it help bring more attention to these beloved series, but it'll inspire others to innovate and create something special, giving the next generation and beyond the chance to explore, to dream, and to create worlds of their own. If you made it this far, please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the kind of content I'm making. This is Balthazar, signing off.